I thought we might start just to give you guys an introduction into Eden Project because it's definitely you're gonna get a lot more content as we go, and I'll obviously leave time for questions Q&A as we at the end. But I thought we might start with what we normally do in all of our meetings that we have, and just start with the Eden Creed. Um, so this is as we began this organization, which is really designed to retrain leaders who have most of the time come out of a very left brain logical, rational, um, pedagogical system. So like seminaries and Bible colleges and stuff like that are, as you guys know, end up being a stranger to themselves. They can exegete the text, but not their own heart. And so what we're doing is really kind of we've called it a right brain seminary. We've called it relational retraining. We've called it, relational discipleship. But really, in a lot of ways, too, this statement just spells out our what we believe is a story about who God is, who we are, and how people change. You can call this a relational anthropology. You can call it a relational theology, but I'm just going to read through it. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to have Chuck read through it, and as we like to say, we read this slowly, contemplatively, and let it fall on us like snow. So, Chuck, I'm going to let you take it. And
Want me to do the whole thing?
yes, sir.
We believe God is triune, Father, Son, and Spirit, and has joyfully existed as a community of love for eternity. God is love. We believe we were created in the image of God, who is inherently relational. As such, the quality of our lives is the quality of our relationships. We believe we rejected God through a relational rebellion born out of a false story regarding our ability to find life apart from Him. Sin alienates us from God, ourselves, and others, and leads to loneliness, guilt, and shame. We believe early formative experiences in a fallen world have shaped how we relate and how we image God. We believe as we're restored through counter narratives, we are discovering God is better than we believed Him to be. We believe as dependent creatures designed for God, awareness of our need is a precondition of relational connection. We believe the Holy Spirit is our source of power, the indwelling teacher and guide for all of life. We create space to slow down and pay attention to the Spirit's active presence in us, around us, and for us. We believe there are no experts in the company of Jesus. We are all learners.
You guys need to get up.
We believe we grow to experience the love of God in a safe, secure environment of grace, not judgment. We believe the present is our only opportunity for connecting. We cannot relate in the past or the future. So we intentionally walk in the present at the pace of love. We find that hurry mutes the voice of God and blinds us to the other images of God around us. We believe noticing and naming our deepest desires and desperations in the presence of God and others guides us into what is true about us and God's purposes through us. And we believe, having connected deeply with God, ourselves, and others, we now carry this message to others in our neighborhoods and nations.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. Well, no doubt. I think as you heard that read over you, you probably connected with a couple different pieces of that, as people inevitably do, or maybe something stuck on you where you were like, "Oh, I hadn't thought of it like that before," which is totally fine. I think one of the things that would encourage us is if something did land on you or you're present to something, as Chuck read that, and you want to talk about it, just feel free to reach out, email myself or Chuck, and we'd love to interact with you about that. But that gives you a sense of kind of what we're doing here at Eden Project is we're kind of walking people through that creed in a way that doesn't explicitly just go, okay, you're on step one, you're on step two, So we're relationally retraining, and I'll start by telling you a little bit, very briefly, a part of my story, and then jump into how I got into what we're doing now. I was born in a conservative Christian tradition that held a very high view of Scripture, and also a very high view of good behavior. so, so I was taught to believe the right things and be a good little boy, and also, as Phil knows, really deeply at this point, having been my counselor for over a year, that there were aspects of that environment that were very broken. And but at the same time, it was the water I was swimming in, the air I was breathing. I didn't know any better. And so I just thought that to do well and to be successful in the sphere that God had placed me in, I needed to know a lot of things about God and the Bible, and I needed to have my act together, which I was able to do for a while. Frankly, did that pretty well until and that play totally worked, until it didn't. And while I was in seminary here in Dallas, I was getting my master's of theology at Dallas Seminary. What I like to say is my interior life could no longer keep pace with my exterior life. I was running hot. I was burning out. I didn't know that I was doing that because everything I was doing was good, but there were also just patterns of dysfunction in my interior life. There were, things that were manifesting through sin patterns and stuff like that I just couldn't control. And so I had a pretty disorienting experience at Dallas Seminary. But in the middle of that disorientation, God met me in a really powerful way, at my most vulnerable, definitely the most vulnerable that I had ever been in my life. And who we like to call God actual, that will make more sense later. But God actual like showed up, and instead of feeling judgment from him and condemnation from him, and a bunch of consequences and penalties to pay, instead I was met with just a real unconditional love. And that started a layer of peeling back of my interior life where I started doing some work. I kind of put all that on pause because I right after that I joined the military and was in the Army for 6 years. I deployed a couple of times to Afghanistan as an infantryman, and if there's one thing about the military that it will reinforce, it's performance-based acceptance. So, like, if you're gonna not be a dirtbag and actually be, a stud, then you better have all your junk together. I mean, the military literally has a term for it. It's called being squared away. So, are you squared away? Or are you a dirtbag? And so, just like again, reinforcing all of that stuff. Well, after my second deployment to Afghanistan, my wife got pregnant with our oldest, Nate, and we decided that it would probably be better if I was no longer being shot at. And so we decided to get out of the Army, and I started my doctoral work at Biola University. This is kind of like phase two in my story where the Lord really started peeling another layer back, because in year two of that doctoral program, um, I was out in California for a summer residency, and this kind of 5 foot nothing old woman walked in, and our advisor was like, "Hey, I got to go. I'll see y'all at lunch. Betsy's going to take this morning." And I was just kind of like, okay, what's going on here? And about 30 minutes into her lecture, she led us through a series of exercises. And what the exercises did is it raised to the level of awareness your implicit, kind of subconscious, emotional experience of God. And the exercise she took us through was very effective for me. The Holy Spirit definitely energized it because I was a mess. And I was like, oh, more and more, I was like, I know a lot about God, and I've actually been doing a lot of things for God. I mean, I've, all kinds of things. I'm kind of a resume like Paul had in Philippians 3. but but my experience of him was very, what have you done for me lately? Like, if you've done good, you get good. If you've done bad, you better watch out. Like, not Santa Claus is coming to town, but I am, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Um, and so I really started to come to grips with my experience of God as like a cosmic coach, being an athlete and then being a soldier, being in competitive environments and, performance-based environments. And then growing up in a family that was competitive, and where I was often felt like I had to prove myself, especially with my oldest brother. And so that sent me on a journey where I was completely disoriented. And so I pretty quickly was like, hey, I got to figure out what's going on here. It launched me in a journey that ended up with what I'm going to talk to you guys about over the next 25 minutes or so. So the first thing I did was dive into the world of psychoanalysis. And it's funny, I sat at my desk this morning and just kind of laughed because I was like, really a lot of what we're doing is in the field of kind of psychoanalytic studies. And I'm like the last person who thought that I would ever get into anything like this. But the foundation for psychoanalysis is basically that everybody lives in their own interior world, and that interior world is very representational. It's a world of objects, but that your interior world is not the exterior world. And so that kind of presupposition or foundation was new to me, and so I dove deep into the rabbit hole of object representations, of kind of a representational theory. When you get into that, pretty quickly, people will start to reference the neurobiology of how does the mind emerge from the brain? If the brain houses the mind, but the brain is not the mind, which was the error of Rene Descartes back in the day, then how do we how do we understand the flow of information and how that affects what psychologists call an internal working model or the interior world of a person's life? Think of the interior working model as like the set and the plot that a play plays out on. So that's the genius of Pixar's movie Inside Out, where what we're seeing is they're representing through these characters and the islands in Riley's interior world. They're representing her internal working model. That's the way that she represents the external world, but it's not the external world. And so what I started to do is get into the world of how information flows, which that led me into the world of attachment theory, because you can't really study the mind and the brain and how human behavior changes over time without talking about attachment. And so very briefly, because I know you guys are pretty familiar with this, I just want to go through this is an overview, and then we're going to really camp out on the deal that's called a God representation. So this is just neurobiology 101. The biggest thing you need to know here is that information always starts from the bottom and goes up. So instead of thinking of the brain as just the gray matter in your head, think of the brain as your entire neural system. So your body acts like a sonar that pulls in raw data from the environment, sends it up through your body, and this is why there's the dots on there. First, the brainstem, which acts as a doorkeeper. It's kind of like, hey, is this good information or bad? Is this positive, negative? Is this something we should defend against, or just open the gates wide? Depending on the kind of the data that your body is receiving from the environment, it will either it'll go to the limbic system and it will activate either the hippocampus, which is who is it? Dan Siegel and Kurt Thompson and those guys call the puzzle piece assembler, where it takes the raw data and it puts it into a picture that is incomplete. It's always incomplete, but the hippocampus, if it's functioning properly, will put it into a good enough picture that it then sends to the right cortical hemisphere. The right side of the brain is the seat of the emotion. It's the seat of experience. It will absolutely see like the forest and not the trees. If you try to make it see the tree, it won't do it. Like it's a very holistic, like I'm having this experience and it kind of feels like this. What's super interesting about that is the hippocampus will send a picture to the right cortical hemisphere, but it's incomplete. So what the right cortical hemisphere does is it fills in all of the gaps in the incomplete picture with memory that's stored in the right side of the brain to try to complete the picture. Once it does that well enough, then it'll pass it to the left cortical hemisphere where it'll start to put language on it. You'll start to tell a story about it. You can put it into a coherent narrative, and you become aware of it. Right now, you have explicit thought. Once it's there, then it ends up kind of hanging out here right behind your forehead in what's known as the prefrontal cortex. And that's where you play with it. Like all of our higher reasoning, philosophical thought, those kinds of things happen in the prefrontal cortex. Then and this is really beautiful as well, is the information then becomes bidirectional. So it starts bottom up and goes left to right. But once you've played with it, it can go back and re-inform the body about experience. But, and this is the critical point, it never starts from the top and goes down. Information always comes from our environment first, through the right side of the brain to the left side of the brain, and then is played with in the prefrontal cortex. However, if the information in the brain stem is causing a fight, flight, freeze response, as you guys are well aware of, then what happens is it activates the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the limbic system that activates the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands, when they're activated, they just like push cortisol throughout the body. And so you become really rigid. When that happens, if the amygdala is activated, the hippocampus doesn't function like it's supposed to. And so the picture that gets sent to the right side of the brain is really incomplete, which means a lot of the information to try to complete the picture is filled in with imagination, with fantasy, with previous experience, embodied experience. And the stuff that's not processed in the right side of the brain ends up getting stuck there. And so when you talk about like where's trauma stuck in the brain, it's most of the time stuck in the right cortical hemisphere. The experience, I'm having the experience of something happening, even though I can't make sense out of it. So when similar experiences come after that, I will map on a previous experience to new ones. And you end up living in that cycle of trauma, like, for a disorganized person all the time. Your internal working model, that interior life thing, becomes very skewed through an embedded experience of I live in this specific experience like all the time. So which obviously makes attachment environments extremely important, because those are the environments where, while your brain is forming, you're living in an attachment environment, which means that your body is pulling signals from its environment and sending it through that flow of information we just went through all the time. Like you can't run away from it. It's not like you can go, you know what, I don't like my attachment environment, I'm gonna go to another one. You're just born into it. And so in that environment, especially with a primary attachment figure or figures, but mostly a figure, then you're either secure, which means that the environment is good enough for that information flow to be complete, in which case you always know somebody is in a secure environment where they can play, not just physically play, but psychologically play, emotionally play. They're playing with their images. That's what you want. That's a good thing. They're able to be mindful about their environment, even though they don't know to call it that. However, if the environment is not good enough, then one of three major patterns ends up arising. And what these patterns are defense mechanisms against a dangerous environment that, well, it's insecure. So the first one you can see there is anxious. Sometimes this is also called ambivalent. And in the anxious ambivalent attachment pattern, the person will stay really close to the primary attachment figure because they're trying to manipulate the person to get a positive, secure response from them. And so they'll stay really close to them to try to pull a lever or control the figure to try to become secure. But as we all know, that doesn't work. So what it does is it creates a ton of anxiety or ambivalence in the life of the child, because the child cannot imagine separating from or differentiating from the primary attachment figure, because its entire identity is rolled up in, who do you say that I am? All of us are asking those seminal questions of, do you see me? Do you love me? Do you know me? Do I have agency? Do I have a voice? Do I matter? And when that answer is either I don't know or is answered negatively, then people are gonna they're gonna try to get the primary attachment figure to answer them positively through one of these three ways. The second one is called avoidant. You can see the two out there on the edge of the environment, because the avoidant person is going to actually just like kind of stiff arm the attachment figure and go, hey, I don't trust you. I will not of my own accord leave the attachment environment. No human ever will. Some people will be forced out, but nobody will just self-elect, like, hey, I'm out of here. I choose to leave you. We just won't do that because we're wired to attach. And so that the avoidant person will stay far enough away as a defense mechanism from the insecurity of the attachment figure, hoping that if they stay there, that there will be a renewed chance for a secure attachment in the future. And then lastly is disorganized. You can see there, this is disorganized. Typically, it's like 90 something percent of people who are disorganized are formed in an attachment environment that's actually dangerous. That's like physically or emotionally or sexually dangerous, where somebody needs to go to jail, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, prolonged emotional abuse, which studies have shown prolonged emotional abuse has the same psychological effect as sexual abuse. And so what the child experiences there is, hey, I have this overwhelming desire to attach to my attachment figure, but also the overwhelming desire to run away from the person who's dangerous. And so you have these two really powerful instinctual responses going on simultaneously, and it literally like fractures the interior life of the child. So typically the question becomes, okay, well, that's like your formative environment. Don't you grow out of that? And the answer in attachment studies, and frankly, just psychological studies in general, is an overwhelming no. You don't grow out of it. You're hardwired in these environments because of the way that your brain is formed. That by the age 25, your brain is pretty much wired the way that it's going to be wired. And so obviously birth to 18, which is typically the primary attachment environment, becomes really significant for understanding how people relate to themselves and to others and ultimately to God. Now, what's cool is you don't grow out of it, but it can be transformed, which is the work that you guys are doing, which is really beautiful. So that's just a very high overview of neurobiology and attachment. The thing I want to talk about next is just that differentiation between the world of objects. So we live in a world of real, Like, I don't think anybody's arguing that the world is illusory. Like, we live in a real world with real objects. We are actually real objects, corporeal, material. We have a physical body. We interact with physical objects. Even when we try to describe the lack of a physical thing, we have to describe it in terms of a thing. So nothing is a no thing, right? So like we're 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 in this kind of box of knowledge of what we can know, and the way that we interact with those objects is through that internal working model, or the way that we represent the world in our own minds and bodies. And then C is the way that we relate to objects through our representation of them. So this thing there, and I always use a chair because when I'm talking and teaching and stuff, there's just always a chair on the stage. So that's what the chair is, even though we're on Zoom today. So A is the real chair, B is the way that you represent chairs in your body and in your mind, and then C is the environment that shapes your experience with chairs that can change the representation through experiences of that. So it's kind of like, okay, cool, like neurobiology, attachment, psychoanalysis 101. Like, what does it have to do with it? What does it have to do with anything? So the question for me was, when I was going through those seasons of disorientation, was, as a Christian, and not just as a Christian, but as a human being, every human being is dealing with the question of God. And so like Anna Maria Rizzuto, who wrote The Birth of the Living God, she has a statement where she says, from a psychoanalytic standpoint, there is no such thing as an atheist. Like, even an atheist has a well-developed internal representation of who they believe God to be. They just can't emotionally accept their representation. But that doesn't make the representation actually God. It's just a representation. And and representations are formed in environments. And so when it was, the question became fascinating to me, that is, how are we all saying the same creed? How are we all like, or especially around the essentials, in agreement on these things? How are we all generally talking about God? But then when you sit down with someone and really start to get into their experience of God, they're talking about a being or a person who is very unlike your own experience of that person. Maybe it's like it in some significant ways, but it also is unlike it in some significant ways. And so there's kind of this fascinating question of, which God are we talking about? And I think in this sense, what we have is what is known as a God representation. So I'm kind of putting all these things together. Out of the attachment environment, when a child is between 4 and 6 years old, they are going to begin to represent an object in their minds that they cannot see. But this object, like, everybody talks about it. Our calendar is based around it. We do liturgy around it. Our entire society stops like once a year to celebrate a birthday of this unseen object. Like, it's a really powerful representation. And at least in English, we call it a God representation. So this child begins to develop this, and the raw ingredients of any given God representation is one that is both conceptual. So that's the God concept. That's all the left brain, all the L's, the left brain, logical, linguistic, linear. It's very explicit. It's a slow processing. You're thinking about it. This is the God of the philosophers, right? You can totally change the concept through Sunday school, through theological training, through conversations with friends. Like, this thing is very malleable, depending on what environment it's born in. But then the other aspect of any given God image is any given God representation is what we call the God image. And the God image is, or what I like to call, the God of the gut. This is the part where, when you actually experience God in prayer, or through a life circumstance, or through whatever it is, it's the emotion that hits you when you begin to experience God. And you always know that you're hitting it because you'll have an emotion around it, but then right after that, the God concept will come, and defend against you actually getting to the root God image. It's all right brain experience. It's all the right brain stuff. Experience, emotional. It's really fast. It's reflexive. You don't quite know it's happening. It's like when the doctor hits your knee with that little hammer, and your leg's just like, you're like, daggone. Sometimes I try to fight that. I'm like, you're not going to do it to me this time, and your leg it's just you can't help it. It just goes. And so the amazing thing about this, though, is that the ingredients of our God image are born, they're drawn from the raw data of our experience of our attachment environment. So if you grew up in an environment where the attachment figure was insecure, was gone all the time, was critical, was angry a lot, those kinds of things, then anything that you're experiencing with God is going to be experienced through the lens of your attachment environment. And so this is why a lot of people will say, hey, I believe that God loves me. They'll say that. That's a conceptual idea, is that God loves me. But then when you start to dig underneath and talk about their experience of God and ask them questions like, but do you believe that he delights in you? Do you believe that when you come to his mind that he smiles? Things like that. A lot of people in my experience are like, oh, like, yeah, I know he loves me, but I'm not really sure that he delights in me. And what you're seeing there is the delta between somebody's concept and their image. The problem with that is that when there is a delta, the one that wins out every time is the image. So somebody can say they believe that God loves them all day long, but if they don't experience the love of God, then then what you're getting from them is lip service, which has no power to actually transform their lives. Nobody is transformed until they experience the reality that God is love, that he is smiling on them, that he is for them, that he delights in them. And then once they begin to have that experience of the love of God, that's when they're going to start to change. Now we can give them tools and all kinds of stuff to deal with the distresses of their lives, but there is no such thing as someone going, well, I don't believe in God, so it doesn't really apply to me. Everybody believes in God. Now they may not say, well, I don't believe in your concept of God. It's like, okay, great, but you still have a God image, and it is driving the way that you behave, 100%. So I want to. This is an interesting little chart. I'll go through a couple more things and then I'll open it up for questions. But a lot of people have been trained to look at God instead of move toward him. Those are two very different things. So this is called Esther Meek in her book Loving to Know, which I'm looking at right now. Has this distinction between a focal point and a subsidiary point. So when you're looking at, like right now, Jules, my daughter, is learning to read, and so she looks at words and she's like, oh, dog, right? There's a really powerful movement that happens between when she's looking at the actual characters, DOG, which are just symbols. Like if you don't know English, they mean nothing, right? So in English, though, if you put an O next to a D and a G next to O, all of a sudden, like for somebody who knows English, now all of a sudden you're thinking about the furry little animal that everybody loves and licks your face, and yay, right? So for someone who has been trained in their formative environment to defend against relationship, then they are going to talk about God. They're going to look at the symbols of God all day long. They're going to be theologians who have like 5 PhDs in like biblical theology, historical theology, systematic theology, textual criticism. They're going to have all these things, right? But they're just looking at it instead of looking from it to the real thing. Those are two very different things. And in order to look from the symbol to the actual thing that the symbol represents, you have to have secure attachment and you have to have relationship. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to know information and you're going to try your best to do the information that you have, but you're never actually going to love or be loved. And most people, that it's interesting, the dominant category that people have for the way they relate to God is angry. And as you guys know, and we say around here all the time, it's like, man, you will never love something that you're afraid of. You just won't do it. Um, and that's why I think, when God actual, now I'm not talking about B, your representation that's down here, right? I'm talking about A, the actual object. That God who exists from eternity past, who is Father, Son, and Spirit, and has joyfully existed in a community of love for eternity. That God is love, and and He's way better than we think He is, and that it is a central aspect of what you guys do, whether people are Christian or not, doesn't matter. But it is a central aspect for someone to come to know themselves and accept themselves. They always must see themselves through the eyes of the other. And one of the things you guys provide as coaches is a physical other, but even you are a representation of what is the ultimate other. They are every single person you meet with is an image of God, and they are designed to be in relationship with God. Now, you can be for them a trusted guide, but you are not the other. The other is God actual, and until people have the experience of the love of God, the ongoing experience of being accepted, of being loved, of being delighted in, then the ceiling of their capacity to what they can have in relationship with themselves and others and ultimately God, that ceiling will remain fairly low, even if they have a bunch of tools and interventions that they learn in how to cope with their lives without ultimately moving to the one at the center, who is the lover of their souls. And so that's what we do at Eden Project. We create environments for people to reconnect, or to connect maybe even for the first time, deeply, not with their representation of God. We actually do a lot of work to get that thing malleable so we can shift and change it, so that it can become a more accurate representation of the real thing. And the beauty is, man, we're seeing all kinds of really awesome fruit come from people who come to realize for the first time that God's not angry at him. He's not critical of him. He's not disappointed in him. He's definitely not distant from him. Golly. Um, and so in a lot of ways, these images that we're playing with um, are being reshaped, reformed, healed, so that people can, instead of looking at God, move actually toward him. And what they find when they move toward him. Actually, let me see. I've got this cool deal. This is a great image that Chuck showed me. Um, let's see. Yeah, it's a great image. When people actually begin to move toward God, what they are pleasantly surprised by is that moving toward God ends up looking something like that. Where you just tired, exhausted, wrung out, yearning that God might, by some chance, let you come back and be one of his slaves. And while he sees you coming from a long way off, he runs toward you. It's like, that's the real thing. That is God of God, light from life, true God of true God. If you And it's interesting if we were able to peel back all of the layers of reality just one by one infinitely, or not even infinitely, you can't get to the end of it. Um, that's called something. Um, but inscrutability. But if we're able to peel back all these layers and get to the actual core of what is actually real in the world, in the cosmos, I think the reality of what we would find there is love. It is the summum bonum, so to speak, the the ens realissimum, a bunch of Latin words of just it's the highest end of everything that's real, is the reality that God is love. All right, we have 15 minutes, Phil. What do you want to do, man?
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Just to coattail on one thing, some of you may have seen it on social media. There's this beautiful image going around. A guy collects photographs of guys who have hit home runs rounding third base, and they show down the third base line of all his teammates waiting for him. And he's collecting those as pictures of when we enter heaven,
Mm.
and the cloud of witnesses waiting. So that I was thinking of that when you showed that in. That's beautiful, beautiful image. So obviously, guys, Nathan covered a ton, object representation, psychoanalysis, all that stuff. So now's your chance. We have about 15 minutes or so. So any questions about anything that comes up, whether it's for you and your own life or your coaching, anything around any of that, this is a great time for questions. And I'm sure he's willing to go back to slides if you want to say more, learn more about those. So this is the guy who wrote a lot about it, teaches this all the time. So what questions do you have? No need to raise your hand. Just go ahead and ask it whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm Maria. I have a question. So I have had clients like interested in learning more about attachment styles, personally their attachment styles and what to do about it. What kind of resources could you point us to as coaches when, working with stuff like that?
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually been quite a bit written recently um, that are good summaries of the stuff that I've talked about. One of them is by Jim Wilder, who wrote a book called Renovated, which is really good. And then this one's by Todd Hall, which is called Relational Spirituality. He gets into attachment in this book. This is a great. Todd is a psychoanalyst, and a lot of his academic work has deeply influenced the way that I think about this stuff. So this is a really good summary book um, on uh, on that. So those two are like immediately um, on my desk. Then there's let's see. He also Todd Hall. Um, if you want to start with a little bit of a lighter one, he wrote a book called The Connected Life, where he talks about attachment in here as well. Honestly, like the study I've done in attachment, which I've read. I mean, I've got Mary Main, I've got um, uh, Ainsworth, I've got Waters, Wald, obviously John Bowlby. Those are all the attachment people. Um, and the more I've read about all of that, it's really not that complicated. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, hey, as you consider your attachment style, the best thing to look at is just your family of origin and to look at how did I relate to my dad, my mom, my siblings. And then generally speaking, I think, if you have the capacity to, then you will start to be able to identify some patterns of like, man, I avoided them like crazy, or like, yeah, they were dysfunctional, but I kind of ended up in a codependent relationship because I couldn't bear to move away from them, in which like most codependent relationships are born out of an anxious attachment. And so I think if you just access some of these resources, then I think it'll be pretty clear. They honestly, I mean, you can get into the academic work, which if you want to, great. If you want to tackle one that's a little bit thicker, this one is Robert Karen. And this is kind of the attachment Bible, so to speak, where if you want to really dig into kind of all of it, then this is probably the best summary work. And then obviously you can get into all the academic work that Bowlby did. He has a 3-volume work on attachment. Mary Ainsworth and her patterns of attachment. Mary Main doing all of her work that follows Ainsworth. I mean, it's a bunch of stuff, but hopefully that'll at least get you started in the right direction.
Really good. Thank you, Maria. There is a ton out there. Interest as people are
Yeah, I'm
doing.
interested. Phil, would you add anything to that?
No, I literally had the same list you did, the top 3.
Sure.
Nathan knows I got a bit of a man crush on Todd Hall. I just think his stuff is just so the relational spirituality. You guys have seen a couple of slides, as a matter of fact, from him around filter. A lot of what Nathan has talked about today. Hall calls it filtering. Like these early caregivers, our experiences with them create the filter by which we see the world and through which we interpret it.
Yep.
So those top 2, renovate and relational spirituality, I think are great, and for sure, Nathan, the Bible about
Yeah.
attachment for sure.
Yeah, this guy.
Yeah, guy.
Yeah, the technical term for filter is internal working model. So that's the when I say internal working model, what I'm talking about is that filter that all of your experiences are filtered through. And that filter has a flavor and a color and but if people don't understand it and they don't understand that it's even there, then what they do is live what in psychological terms they call an embedded life, where people will function as if they are their experience. There's no differentiation to go, I'm having an experience, but the experience is not me. That would be like a mindful deal where most people who don't understand their internal working model they're just embedded. It's very difficult to differentiate them from their own experience.
Other questions today? Your own life, people you work with, your own story. Nathan, if you would, I would love a review, especially for coaches, this slide around the 0 to 10. If you would just say a little more, and if other questions come up around that, that's where my energy is drawn to, like if I end up on the second peg there,
Yep.
and I have all kinds of knowledge, the theological training, psychological training, whatever. And if God actual is 8 pegs away, if you would say more just around that, like either your own experience or what you see in the academy or whatever, like that of all the slides for me, that one in terms of practicality, that one's super, even for my own life, my own journal, like where am
Absolutely.
I today, 0 to 10,
Yep.
in my image and God actual and my object relation.
Totally. Yeah, so this is what I developed an assessment. Phil actually just went through it not too long ago, called the God Image Diagnostic Assessment. And it's designed to pull that implicit God image to the level of awareness. And then just look at it and connect dots to go, hey, I think this is how this has developed over time. This is where it is right now. It's either stuck or it's digressing or it's progressing. And I would say probably having assessed about 100 people, I would say that on average, the health of most people's images is probably around a 3. Part of that is because part of that's on the church, because we have not trained people to think about Christian spiritual formation in a robust way. And so, for most people in churches, the highest end of the spiritual life is to get people through some kind of Bible study to the point where they have a working knowledge of the scriptures and that they at least exhibit a consistent activity or adherence to those scriptures. And so it's kind of like the theory of of change being, if I can get you the right information and then you work hard enough to do those things, then you will change. And I would say in my experience, well over 80%, maybe even the 90%. And again, it's anecdotal, so it's just my experience, but I think it's probably systemic, of churches. That is their metric for measuring spiritual health. And that's just the wrong metric. So part of it is we're just measuring the wrong thing.
Mhm.
Again, it's like, hey, I know a bunch of stuff and I pray and and I read the scriptures and I serve my church and maybe I'm an elder or whatever. And it's like, that's awesome. Great. All good things. But when you pray, who are you praying to? Like when you do ministry, why are you doing that? And more often than not, again, I've got a ton of research that backs this up. More often than not, the answer is something like, that's what I'm supposed to do in order to be accepted by my community, maybe ultimately by God. I had a leader at a church one time, when we were going through all of this. We finally got to the core, and he goes, honestly, man, I'm afraid. I'm deeply afraid of God. And I'm afraid of Judgment Day because I just don't know how that's going to go. And this dude is a leader in his church. And so again, I think as a church, what we have to do is begin to measure the right things. Right? I mean, dude, like if you're going to assess somebody in your church, then build an assessment that a Pharisee would fail. Like that's what you got to do. Otherwise, most of our metrics, like a Pharisee is passing them with flying colors, but they're the ones that when God actual showed up, they killed him. They freaking killed him. It's like, okay, something is off there. When the real thing shows up, you nail him to a tree. I think there may be a delta between what you believe about God and who God actually is. And so that's a piece of it. I think the other part of it, is that the church has, even when they do a good job of teaching the disciplines, they teach them in a very superficial way that just gets people to do something instead of having a really rich theology of transformation, where the disciplines are a means to an end and not an end to themselves.
Mhm.
Most churches just teach them like as an end to themselves, just do these things. And so I think that, but as Phil, you and I've talked quite a bit about the reality that I truly believe that there is some kind of awakening or reforming work that's going on in the body of Christ,
Mhm.
around these things. I think a lot of our assumptions that have gone unchallenged for a long time are being challenged. I think a lot of our presuppositions are showing that they're ultimately failing. And so I think that there's a corrective work going on. I'm super encouraged about it.
Amen.
So,
Yes. Yes. Thank the Lord, literally. Well,
yeah, seriously.
well said. Anyone have a 30-second question? I don't want to leave. So if you have a burning desire, say a couple of parting shots and we'll be done. But anyone have anything really pressing on them they want to ask? Nathan, thank you so much. I want to just last thing you mentioned the Baylor study, God as being distant, critical, or angry. And I really encourage the last slide Nathan showed us and those three categories that a lot of, I'll say us, I have lived a long time with God being seeming distant to me of the three. So really paying attention to those three categories of non-benevolent God, it was called in the study. And then with what Nathan presented on the grid, there's a super great personal discipline and then help others with. But
Yep. I'll say two things, to end, Phil. One is, the God representation. You have to understand that it's a living, changing thing. It's not static. If it is static, that's really dangerous because people are going to start to believe that their representation of God is actually God. And that is not good. That's where you get a lot of dogmatism, a lot of spiritual abuse, a lot of things that really harm people. So it has to be malleable. And so I would just encourage you guys as you're thinking through your own representation of God, just to go, hey, am I open to, seeing God in a new light? Am I open to maybe some new practices that might introduce a new awareness that might take me on a deeper journey? And then secondly, I think as you guys are coaching people through 10 man and you're going to run up against their God image, whether people know it or not. You will run up against it. And if it requires something where you're like, man, I think you really ought to, you know, take a deeper look at this, then please send them our way. I mean, we would love to get them on one of our retreats called the Journey Home, that introduces them to this whole journey and just see what the Holy Spirit might do with it. So again, thank you guys so much. I'm always amazed that people give me the mic and actually listen to what I say. So I'm just really grateful that you guys gave me your attention. I don't take that for granted. So thank you.